Hi, college football fans. This is Alex. I just wanted to preface this podcast by saying that we encountered a small technical issue after recording. I didn't hear it in the mix as we were recording, but after the fact, it appears that there was a some sort of crackle in my mic line. So periodically throughout the episode, mostly near the beginning, you'll hear some crackles in my audio. We apologize for this technical oversight, and we're going to fix it for next time. I went through and removed all of the ones that I could, but some are still there. So once again, I'd like to apologize for those mistakes, but the majority of the podcast sounds perfectly fine, so I hope you enjoy it. Hello, college football fans, and welcome to episode 41 of College Football Throwdown. I am your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hi there, fans and Husker fans.
Yes, we're welcome to Husker fans as well as fans of college football in general. Yeah, we are
That's right.
Open podcast here. All right, and yes, we here are College Football Throwdown. We are a father-son duo podcast, college football podcast by college football fans for college football fans. And as I said, this is our 41st episode, our episode for March, although we're technically recording it in beginning of April. But shh, you don't need to think about that. Yeah, well, I mean, we've been doing these monthly as we're kind of in the off season, and we'll get back up to speed once the season begins in earnest. But I definitely think we'll do another podcast probably in the later part of April after the spring game for Nebraska, for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So, yeah, to start with, we're going to dive into our Nebraska talk a little bit. One little, not really, relevant to our current college team, but just a cool thing is that Rex Burkhead was signed on by the Patriots. And obviously, we wish him the best because he was a great player for us.
Right. And I tell you, I think that, I mean, if I was going to recommend a team for him to go to with the skill set that he has, and while he still has hopefully enough quickness and speed and years left in him, I have a feeling that New England will find a lot of ways to utilize Rex.
Mm-hmm. I also saw on the Husker Max website that apparently Tommy put in some pretty good numbers on the scouting day, right?
He did. He put some really good numbers together, and I think to his credit, I think he's already angling to present himself as an athlete / wide receiver / wildcat quarterback possibility, so that he's not completely throwing in the towel on being a quarterback, but he recognizes that his NFL future is likely as a wide receiver of some sort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that seems more likely to me because he doesn't have the throwing arm to be really competitive at the college level. There's no way he could do that at the NFL level.
Right, exactly.
Right. But still, definitely hope for good things for Tommy too. He's definitely
That's true.
He's definitely a fighter. We know that for sure.
That's right, exactly. And that's the thing, is his competitive nature might work really well. It's just that typically, the skill set you need to be an NFL wide receiver in terms of running routes with precision, understanding timing, and frankly being able to block so that you don't leave somebody out hanging to dry within the scheme of whatever offense you're in, are all important skills he does not possess right now, right? So he would have to learn a lot. Somebody's going to have to get with him and be very patient. So I suspect he's still looking at a free agent contract situation, and if he gets with the right team who's willing to say, you know what, we're going to give you some time because we see your pure athletic skill and believe it's worth the effort.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And then on the actual college football front, we've been seeing some stories about how our new defensive coordinator, Bob Diaco, is moving around positions on the defense, kind of shifting people from different positions, trying to find where he thinks they're the best for
Right.
his new system.
Right, absolutely. Well, the thing is that I guess to jump in on that, there is a number of things with that they're trying to get accomplished with this spring practice, and obviously with a new defensive coordinator, their first thing is to figure out how the puzzle pieces fit within his new defensive scheme. And so there's some good news, bad news. The good news is you've switched to a 3-4 defensive scheme, so all of a sudden your need for defensive linemen and the skill sets of those defensive linemen shifts quite a bit. But all of a sudden, instead of having 4 positions on the D line, we only have 3. So we have the bodies that we've been recruiting for a 4-person position that all of a sudden becomes 3. So now you've got a few more bodies to work with. Now some of those puzzle pieces are they don't fit anymore, right? But in other cases, you're able to consolidate and merge, and maybe a couple of players are encouraged to lose a little weight. A couple of guys are encouraged to bulk up, that sort of stuff, depending on the roles that we're targeting them for. And similarly, the opposite is then true at linebacker, where, up until this year, we had a 4-3 defense where you had 3 linebacker positions. Now all of a sudden you have 4. And the requirements of those linebacker positions are different than they used to be, right? Those outside linebackers have a very different role, are required to do quite a bit of stuff, and so those fits aren't exactly perfect. So he's got a bunch of stuff he's got to do up front, right? Then in addition, because of that 3-4 type of setup up front, what he's asking his cornerbacks and safeties to do also changes, and so he's been moving guys, even starters. Guys that were expected to be starters were starters last year, say at cornerback, he moved one of them to safety. And even though we have quite a few safeties in the mix already within our roster, but he's trying to get the very best players on the field, and he recognized that he had 3 guys that he thought were really outstanding within his quarterback group, and he wanted to figure out how he could get that 3rd player on the field at the same time as the other 2. But that also speaks to some thinness. Just like I just spoke about with linebackers, we're going to probably be a little thin at linebacker because we don't have enough of the right guys, right? Particularly on the outside, because those are the 2 roles that probably are the biggest change in this defense. And then additionally, I think we're going to be potentially very good at cornerback. We've got some great athletes there, but we're probably going to be a little thin there. We're not going to quite have the depth that we'd like to have, right? Now, it looks like with all the changes, he's prioritizing safety because he's putting a lot of guys back there at safety, and he wants to make sure he has the 2 best players he possibly can at safety, because there's a bunch of people fighting for a position there.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is just more general question. What percentage of Division I college teams would you say run a 3-4 versus the 4? Well, I know there's multiple different ones, but I definitely feel like the 4-3 is more dominant, more popular.
Well, it has been. However, the 3-4 is gaining in popularity. Oftentimes the collegiate game tends to lag behind but follow the NFL, and the NFL has kind of evolved from this same thing. They went from 5-2 to 4-3 to 3-4, and now the collegiate game's doing the same thing. So there are more teams playing 3-4 now than probably there ever has been in the among the premier teams in the NCAA. But I would agree with you that 4-3 is probably still the more common defensive alignment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so that'll be, like you say. We were just talking earlier about possible attendance numbers for the spring game. If the weather turns out, we could be seeing a pretty full stadium.
Right.
Turn out to see this new defense and the new quarterbacks and all this kind of change that we have coming up this year.
Yeah, it's. I think nationally, people maybe don't recognize it as much. There's Nebraska is typically among the top 15 or 20 teams in the country every year in attendance, and they were the ones. I mean, going back more than a decade, were the ones that really had established this idea of having huge crowds for the spring game and making it a real event. Nebraska was one of the leaders in making that happen. Okay, and the other thing is that not only are they doing that, but Nebraska charges. A lot of the other schools who get these huge attendance numbers are not charging for attendance into the game, so they're not raising money. Now there is for Nebraska, I believe there are some charities that are involved, and so some of the money that is collected from the price of admission for the spring game goes to some charities for Nebraska. But people do have to pay to get in, which that's somewhat of a rarity among colleges for their spring games. But even with that being said, it looks like Nebraska's already pushing 60,000 pre-sold tickets for the game. And so typically there's a pretty decent walk-up crowd to that event. If the weather's nice, a lot of people will choose to turn out. And I don't know, the Big Ten Network tends to be a little wishy-washy about how they're going to cover it. And the other thing I would tell you is that the two big boys of the Big Ten Conference, who generally get preferential treatment on the Big Ten Network, that's a subject for another podcast. Alex, we ought to make note of that. Ohio State and Michigan also have their spring games the same day as us. Now, why we chose to have our spring game on the exact same day as those two, I'm not quite sure, because I think that was a mistake on our part. But because now you're competing with those two teams and their potential recruits, okay, who they're going to be inviting a bunch of people to campus too, right? So now you're competing head-to-head with two of the premier teams in your conference, right, in your region at the same time. I just think that's poor planning on our part. We need to figure out when theirs is and be off by a week, in my opinion, because we're the one asking players to travel a far greater distance on their own dime, by the way, to come see us at our spring game. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
So it's just a bad setup for us. And I think I would be critical. I am being critical of our athletic department and our staff there at Nebraska for not being a little bit more thoughtful about that.
Yep. Well, it's one of those things you just have to be aware of, with not that it's a specific issue to Nebraska, but just in these, lower population states, and those sorts of things,
Right.
You got to be conscious about that.
Absolutely. And in my recent years, Alex, I have come to arrive at the conclusion that for Nebraska to be relevant again in college football, we are going to have some outstanding coaching, because that's an absolute prerequisite. But equally important to that is outstanding recruiting. And that means not only great recruiters in terms of staff members, but our behind-the-scenes staff and how we organize ourselves and how we execute, our various events for recruiting purposes, all are going to be super critical to whether or not we can build the kind of talent pool that will allow us to compete with the Ohio States, the Michigans, the Penn States, the Michigan States, the Wisconsins of the world. We better start out recruiting recruiting very competitively with those schools. And right now we're significantly behind, at least three of those schools: Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan. We're probably on par with Michigan State's recruiting and Wisconsin's recruiting. They just have better coaching, more consistent coaching.
Right.
And that's why they consistently beat us. But we can still see that change. That can move in the right direction. And I think that Coach Riley and his staff are actually doing a lot of really good things. It's just, this is one example where they probably missed the boat just a little bit.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and I don't know what the situation with OSU and Michigan is, but I know we've talked in the past about Alabama, how Nick Saban hires an entire team to help him with his recruiting, and I know that some schools across the country have begun to adopt that method as well, as recruiting has become
Absolutely.
more and more competitive. And so it's like we've talked about in the past with the whole death of the student, the caring for the student athlete in college football. You unfortunately kind of have to adopt those similar methods or be left up behind in the dust. on a
Right.
competitive level.
Right, exactly. And so it's a combination both of what you do to entice future recruits and future players, as well as what you do to manage your current roster, and so that you're always maximizing your talent that you have available to you on any given season. A couple of things that relative to our team and the spring practice that's currently going on. I described to you already some of the areas where I think we're going to, just because of the change in scheme, we're going to see some things, But we had our first real scrimmage of the spring just this past Saturday, so just yesterday. And during that scrimmage, a few things started to emerge. One is that, as we might expect, it looks like maybe we're going to be okay along that defensive line, that we have enough bodies and guys that are starting to pick up on what Coach Diacono wants us to do, that the defensive tackles and defensive ends are starting to emerge and be stable, right? And even show a little bit of depth. So that's great news for our defensive line. However, similarly, I think there's some real question marks about outside linebacker and what's going to happen there. I think we're going to be pretty good or okay at inside linebacker, but outside linebacker, which is a position that has an awful lot on it, an outside linebacker effectively becomes kind of more of an edge rusher in certain setups, certain alignments within this 3-4 type of structure. But they also have to be athletic and quick enough to be able to, cover a slot receiver or a tight end or an H-back running back coming out of the backfield. So those guys have to do a lot of different things, and they have a lot of responsibilities. And so, figuring out and finding guys that can play that position, that's going to be one of the critical elements of what happens the rest of this spring, and of course fall camp next fall. And then similarly, because of some of the changes in it, mixing and matching that Coach is doing on the back end with the corners and the safeties, I think what he's doing is he's trying to give a bunch of different people a chance at safety, with the idea that he wants to make sure he has his best players on the field. And then as far as corner, I think he feels pretty darn good about at least 3 guys, but he needs to develop that 4th guy, and he'd like to take one of those 3 that he loves, and he's trying him at safety. So we'll just have to see how that plays out. But it sure looks like they got the pieces. It's a matter of just putting all the puzzle together.
Right.
On defense.
Right.
Now, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say my other question for you was the update on the quarterback contest.
Mm-hmm.
I was just seeing on Husker Max that one of the commentators was saying that it seemed like Tanner Lee had the edge.
Yeah, I think even coming into the fall or into the spring practice, Tanner Lee was kind of the guy that was the most likely, if you will, to be to emerge as the number 1 quarterback coming out of spring if he did what he was supposed to do, and he's done nothing to dispel that. In fact, there has been just absolutely glowing descriptions from outsiders who've had the opportunity to watch practices. A number of people, including I read Eric Crouch's summary and Damon Benning's summary, a couple of ex-players, and of course Eric is a quarterback and Heisman Trophy winner, and his overall views of what he saw, and he is very impressed. I mean, very impressed, like making statements that suggest, our quarterback position is in as good a shape as it's been in more than a decade. So that's great to hear. That's really great to hear that we really have 3 options, that even the young freshman who's here early, graduated at semester and came to Nebraska early, Gebbia, and I might be destroying his the pronunciation of his last name, but even he played really well, and all of them just have really good vision for the field. They see things, they make the right decisions, they go to the checkdowns when they're supposed to, and everything is just far more efficient. There's far fewer just blow up type plays where either the physical pass is not even close to where it's supposed to be, or the decision making is so poor that it's clearly an interception or a wrong decision. That's very, very different than it used to be. And so that's great news for the offense.
Right. Well, with Tanner, obviously going off of what you've said and what I've known about him in the past, is that it definitely seems like hopefully we'll be taking a step up in the passing game compared
Right.
to Tommy. But what about his running game? Because that's still going to be an important part of our team, obviously.
Well, yes, and they haven't completely given up on that, but I'm going to suggest to you that the quarterback is going to run the ball less than 5 times a game um, in the future. The quarterback is not going to be a central figure in our running game going forward. Although you hope that they're athletic enough that if they need to tuck it in a broken down play situation, or maybe one or two called plays because they're seeing a defense that's kind of disrespecting the running ability of the quarterback, those are the occasions when the quarterback's going to run it, where you're not going to see the kind of football running from the quarterback position that we saw over the last 8 years, 9, 10 years actually, with Coach Pelini, and then Coach Riley's early years with
Tommy.
Tommy. Yep. So that's all in the past. I think what you're going to see a lot more of the zip motion, handoffs to the wide receivers. I think some of those kinds of things are going to be the change of pace to the running game rather than the quarterback run game. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And because we've got 3 guys now, Patrick O'Brien is looking really good as well. I don't mean not to mention him, but all 3 of those quarterbacks look to be capable of running this offense. Now, Gebbia, from a physical standpoint, I think would be it'll be great if O'Brien and Tanner Lee can stay healthy and be good enough, and we have this other transfer young man that's come in who's pretty good too. And I apologize, I don't even know his name, but he's a kind of a preferred walk-on that's come in, and they're all doing pretty darn good. So that will maybe allow us to redshirt Gebbia if everybody stays healthy, and that would be great because he needs to a year in the weight room.
Right.
Is the bottom line. So it would be awesome. And you're going to see them just making a lot of decisions, a lot of passes. The tight ends are going to become more important, and it sounds like the tight ends had a really good day yesterday and are starting to emerge as not necessarily difference makers. I mean, there was somewhat of a lament from yesterday's comments about the fact that if Cethan Carter were a junior last year instead of a senior and was going to be a senior this year, that we might have an All-American on our hands, because these quarterbacks with Cethan Carter might have been a lethal combination. Now, the tight ends we have now appear to have decent hands, but they're not the whole package with the speed and the physicality that Cethan had.
Interesting.
So it's just a timing thing. It's the way it goes. Wide receiver wise, it sounds like we're doing okay. That we're not going to probably see a huge drop off in the performance of that first group, but we do not have the depth that we'd had last year. And recall, last year we needed every bit of that depth because we had so many injuries at wide receiver through the course of the season. So we are still desperately in need of having some of these young guns emerge. And some of these freshmen are probably going to have to come on campus and immediately, get up to speed. And regretfully, the young Kejon Johnson, gosh darn it, I can't remember his name. Johnson Jr. has been hurt and sick, and then he finally got on the field and he just got pads on a little bit ago. Then he pulled his hamstring yesterday. So he's probably going to be, sidelined for the rest of the spring, I would guess, or they're going to be very cautious with him at a minimum. That's too bad for him, because I think they needed guys like him maybe to emerge as guys that we could count on, not to start, but to be part of our depth, be part of that second group, or even the beginnings of a third group. So we're going to be relying on some walk-ons in that wide receiver group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah, losing, Westerkamp was so great. So
yeah,
without losing him is going to be a step back, no matter what way you look at it.
Right. But we got some good talent, good young talent there, and it's just a matter of how quickly they can emerge. Running back was kind of probably an area of it was non-eventful. I think we have 3 guys that are good. None of them have emerged and really taken a stranglehold on the position, which is probably a little disappointing. And in fact, none of them have, like, they're not all complete. You know what I mean? They all have things they do really well, but then they have some things that they're not so good at or not so consistent with. And so we really are taking a bit of a hit at running back right now, because we don't have necessarily any big name freshmen, coming onto the campus in the fall that's going to likely be a player that would come in and immediately, have a big impact at the running back position. We need one of these three guys, if not two of them, to really get it together and become more the complete back than they are right now. So that's probably an area of concern, is running back. And then the biggest area of concern on offense is offensive line. We have some young players that still are in the process of learning and may emerge yet, but they haven't yet. And we have some older players who, frankly, are overdue, and they have not emerged, and they're kind of getting beat up by the defensive line. Now, part of that is a new defensive scheme. They're much more of an attacking, aggressive, fired up group, and they're just not matching the intensity. Well, the criticism from yesterday's scrimmage was the O-line basically got their butts handed to them, and there wasn't a fire for them to get it right, So Coach Cav's got a challenge on his hands, is what it sounds like. And that's going to ultimately dictate the direction that our program goes this year, I think. It sounds like we have some good options at quarterback. We've got some adequate running backs that are going to be good in that role. And we have some pretty darn good wide receivers, especially the starting group. So we've got the potential to have a very effective offense if our offensive line steps up.
Right.
If they don't, we could be in for a rough offensive year.
Yeah, well, that was a consistent issue last year. Tommy would be having a pretty good game, but then he just couldn't. The offensive line just wouldn't protect him. There'd be people in the backfield, and he'd have to run. And sometimes he was so good at scrambling that it would turn out all right. But now that these new quarterbacks probably won't be that good at scrambling as he was.
Correct.
It's going to be even more important that the O-line gets it together.
That's right. I agree. Mm-hmm. I agree. And so we have some returners, that have to be better than they were last year, right? And we had a weakness at the center position. We've got some guys who were younger players who need to, make more of that commitment and rise to the challenge. And then you need to have depth. You're going to need pretty much two lines, right? You're not in good shape unless you have 10 guys ready to go at the beginning of the season, because you're going to need them. And right now, I suspect we don't even have 5. So there's a lot of work to be done on that offensive line. Now that doesn't mean it can't be done. And the raw material is actually there. We've got some guys that we think are going to be good linemen for us, but they're just not ready yet.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, yeah, that's what practice is for, right?
Exactly.
All right. So now we're going to transition into the more global college football in general section of the podcast. Okay. I know you had some things to say about some rules that are currently being discussed within the NCAA. Yeah. We've talked at some length about that, about issues related to the overall game. And obviously there are rules reviews every year of the actual rules for the game itself, the rules committee, right? But then there's also efforts and committees that are created by the NCAA and by the commissioners, the various conference commissioners, to study other things like recruiting and the rules that surround recruiting. And there has been a call by the presidents of the institutions that there be a thorough review of the recruiting process, because the presidents of the institutions are not happy with what has transpired over, say, the last 5-10 years in recruiting, and they don't feel like it's been moving in a positive direction. So there's kind of a requirement that's been laid down by the presidents to say, hey, you guys have got to figure this out, okay? And so there was a proposal that they spent more than a year, I think, putting together. And interestingly,
Sean Eichhorst, our athletic director, was on that committee.
Ooh.
And that group emerged with a proposal last year in the latter part of the year. I believe it was around November. I think it might have came out, like rumor of it or whatever in October, but it was officially kind of unveiled in November. And then and that original proposal, was pitching two additional signing dates, earlier signing dates for the recruiting process, and among a number of other things. Another key item that it was proposing was that with those earlier signing dates, there would also be the ability to have official visits occur earlier in the year. And then thirdly, there's a great deal of attention that's been focused on the emergence of the satellite camps. And so they felt they needed to get their hands around that, both to protect the student athlete, to protect the high school sports aspect of things, and then also to protect the coaches from themselves. And so the proposals, kind of tried to very much limit the number of those satellites and where they could occur and all that sort of stuff. And then as far as the visit time frames, if you're going to have earlier signing periods, then you need to have the ability to get visits happening earlier that are official visits, ones that can be paid for by the institution who's pursuing the student athlete.
Right.
Okay, so all of those things were in the proposal that was reviewed. For the most part, it was almost unanimous that college coaches did not want the early signing period, and there are a number of reasons, that they cited for why that was not a good idea. The logic of why they wanted to do it was for players and for the student athlete who might want to sign and get it over with and be able to concentrate on their senior season. However, even the high school coaches fear that idea for the likelihood or possibility that players would then simply skip their senior year. If you have a signed, sealed, and delivered scholarship to, Ohio State University, and you're from, a suburb of Columbus, why would you play? Why would you risk injury and ruining your career when you already got the scholarship in the bag? It would be far wiser for you to, work out with the local, jock or athlete who can help you develop your skills for the position you're going to play in college, and forget the high school. So those are reasons why that June date was opposed.
Right.
And so it's already been kind of removed from the proposal. The committee got back together in January and they tweaked some things. They also changed the timing of the early visits. Now this is super huge, super critical for the University of Nebraska and other small population universities.
Right.
So this is what would be interesting for our listeners, is that one of the biggest challenges that schools like Nebraska have had over the last really 20 years or so, ever since the explosion of television exposure has happened, since the late 80s, early 90s, where that kind of got equalized, then population density has become far more important to success in recruiting, because now everybody's on TV. So having some advantages that would drive people to some of these traditional programs is now limited to their access to those athletes. And oftentimes, in recent years, for example, a good third, and sometimes even more than a third of the top 300 players, so 100 of the top 300 players, have already committed to institutions before the college school year begins in, say, mid-August.
Right.
A full third. Well, those players could not and cannot, as of right now, cannot have an official visit to a school like the University of Nebraska prior to that date. So they have already gone through the recruiting process and made their decision and are connected with another school before Nebraska could even offer them the opportunity to have a paid visit to Nebraska.
Well, that's true. Although we both know how many times a Nebraska player has committed to us verbally, but then changes their mind before signing day. So
absolutely.
Certainly, there's a lot of poaching that can still occur in that time.
There is still a ton of recruiting that can go on, but the point is that you are behind the eight ball. right? So the objective here would be to give schools the opportunity to have an official visit and then the current proposal is from basically April 1st until sometime in late June would be a window where you could have official visits. You know what that would allow? Think about what our current situation is. We're going to have a football game in 2 weeks, a spring game, in which Nebraska has developed a great setup and tradition. It is like a college game day atmosphere around that stadium in mid-April. Okay, not every school can achieve that. Right now, Nebraska can. So this would be huge for Nebraska to be able to officially invite and get official visits going on during their spring game.
I see.
And that could happen as early as next year, meaning in 2018.
Right. Although, and I get the April to June time frame for that reason, for the spring games.
Yep.
But we were talking a little bit about this on the last podcast we did a month ago, about the convenience for students to be able to like go during the summer months, when they're off school and things of that nature. But I mean, our school, our high school, like doesn't get off until early June regardless. So it's sounding like this would, if it went from April to the end of June, then it would just barely cover the beginning of the summer break for most kids.
Correct. But a lot of times a lot of times the camps and if they're going to have some of these limited satellite camps, typically a lot of those occur in May and June. Okay. And so it would all tie into being able to get them on campus, maybe in association with that, come for a camp, do your official visit, bring your parents with you, the whole deal. So it just makes a lot of sense in terms of the overall calendar. And then it shuts down for July for a couple of reasons. One, it kind of forces a period of less contact in July so that the kids can have their final summer and maybe get a job and that sort of stuff. But also it kind of protects the coaches from themselves and allows them to have a little bit more of a downtime period for at least a month, because that as soon as August hits and they are back into the grind of the season, they're working crazy hours again, right? Mm-hmm. So some of it is to try to give some life balance to the coaches by protecting them from themselves.
Right.
And so those are the reasons why they have established some of those time frames.
Right. And also,
but it would just be huge, though, is the point for Nebraska. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Yes. No. It definitely would be, and it's something we've been talking about for several years, just between you and I. On the last podcast, we were talking about that, as well as the change to the satellite camps, making it so that they could only be at it was only at colleges, and there would be a limit of like how many you could do and things of that
right
nature.
It was instead of over 30 days, it was over a period of 10 days, and yes, they have to be at college institutions or facilities used by college institutions, for their standard practice or performance facilities, so that it would protect from what was starting to happen, where you were going on this barnstorming tour and hitting all the major high schools, in the key recruiting regions, and they were getting bombarded with, trying to coordinate all these satellite camps for all these different universities. So it just kind of takes all that away from the high schools and puts them back into the colleges and says you're gonna have to do this with a college. And so it just kind of helps rein it in a little bit,
right,
and keeps it from being overwhelming.
Right. My question, though, is that when we were talking about it last time on the last podcast, it sounded like that was already legit, like it was done. That was the new rule. But you're saying that this proposal is still being talked about and hasn't been approved yet. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. So currently, the satellite camps is still the old rules, so Harbaugh can go on his crazy spree wherever he wants without these restrictions.
Those particular rules have changed so much. I don't know what the current rules are.
Okay.
So I don't know that for a fact, but I know that this particular proposal is basically there was a committee process that had to happen. They're going to meet again in April, and then there's some kind of an NCAA meeting that's going to occur, I believe, in early summer, either late May or June, in which some of the presidents are going to be there, and all the commissioners are going to be together, and they're going to kind of boom, 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 and they're either going to get this through or they're not. But I suspect that even if it does happen, a lot of these rules may not be in place until the following year. You know what I mean? It's not going to affect this year. But
Right.
I could be wrong. They may put it faster than that.
Yeah, and I agree with what you were saying about the coach's perspective earlier. And on the signing days, the one in June, in the summer, that definitely seems like a bad idea. Whereas doing one in December, as you were saying, that justifies, doing the earlier official visits. And that's only, like 2 months ahead of where it currently is. So players still have to go through their entire senior season. And so I feel like that's a more reasonable.
The advantage of that December timeframe is that is actually already on the recruiting calendar right now. It's the signing day or signing period that's associated exclusively with junior college athletes, right? Guys that are graduating at semester and are junior college players. They can sign their letters of intent in this third week of December type of time frame. Okay, what it allows then is if an athlete has already made their decision, they know where they want to go, they can shut their recruiting down, and this crazy last-minute intensity that happens in February can be ending. And it kind of forces both the school and the athlete to make a commitment. And so then, the athlete and the school know where they stand with each other, right? So if you make that commitment and get that done, now that school knows you're in the bag. Okay, we no longer have to devote resources and time visiting you. So, if you look at it, by the third week of December, a lot of schools have most of their recruiting done, right? They may have 20 of their 25 recruits already committed. Well, with an early December timeframe, they could get those 20 recruits signed, and all the kids who are early entries, like that are gonna graduate at semester, they could be signed. So you got all that behind you. Now you can take the remainder of that final month and a half and focus on those final 7 or 8 athletes that you've targeted in the hopes that you're going to get 5 of those 7. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it allows them to really focus their recruiting on those kids who have not yet decided. Now, what may happen is the kids who love the attention, they're going to want to string it out, right? So they're not going to want to make a verbal commitment early. It will actually cause more kids to wait on their decision, I believe, having an early signing period. It's actually going to cause more kids to hold off on verbal commitment. Because if you've verbally committed to somebody, then you're going to be kind of pressed to shit or get off the pot in that third week of December, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So if you want to play the game till February, then you're not going to want to have that verbal commitment. So it'll force the reservation game that's currently going on to be diminished, where kids commit to the best school that's offered them early and ride that as their reservation. And then when a quote better school comes along, they jump ship at the last minute. Well, now a school like Nebraska, if somebody committed to them early in this reservation kind of situation, where they were still had their eyes out for the home state school or the other some other premier schools that they might still have some interest in, they're just not telling anybody. Well, guess what? Now the third week in December comes. Now we know. We have now a month and a half to recover from this kid's lack of commitment. You see what I'm saying? Because now if he doesn't commit, we know he's not really ours. Mm-hmm. Right?
Right. Well,
so
I was just thinking about that, like in terms of how that's going to change the dynamics. Because you were talking about the craziness of February. That just means changing that around means that a lot of that craziness is just going to be shifted to that December signing day.
Correct. Absolutely true.
And that then, if there's a player that you thought, that you had a pretty good, maybe they haven't verbally committed yet, but you thought, you were their number one choice or whatever, and they don't make a decision in that December time frame, then that might, I'm imagining how that might affect the recruiters. Like, well, you might be a little bit of a Doubting Thomas over there, so maybe I'm not going to focus as much on you and go to this other kid who I think is more, it'll just be interesting to see how that plays with the mental dynamics of it.
Absolutely. It changes the whole methodology and priority. And, everybody's got a board, and this is our favorite player at this position. This is our second favorite player, our third favorite player. All that stuff that whole dynamic would change, and it would accelerate the process, which isn't necessarily a good thing in my opinion. But the fact is, it's already accelerated so much that they got to do something.
Right.
And what they don't want is what the current process has, which has all these kids verbally committing to basically make their reservation, and then at the end of the moment they take secret last minute visits to USC and Alabama. So Alabama can now play this game where they can be slow playing their second and third choices for the entire recruiting process, and then they wait until the last couple of weeks, and if they have if their first choices have left and gone somewhere else, then they can jump on something else, and then a domino effect happens, and all of a sudden those second tier universities, if you will, start bouncing down the dominoes.
Yeah, the process you just described there was reminding me of like an eBay auction where you wait till the last second to put in your bid.
Yep.
Yeah, and compared to the proposed like June signing day, I feel like this December one, like you say, it will still accelerate the process, but I don't feel like it will make coaches go after kids like that much earlier than they already are, because they already are going after talking to kids in like their beginning of their junior year and sophomore year and stuff like that. Moving it ahead 2 months isn't going to do that much to that, versus if you had pushed it all the way up to summer, then that definitely would push more people into talking to sophomores, I feel like.
Right. I would suggest to you that the new signing period will end up being December, and only a few kids will sign in February. I would speculate that 80% of most recruiting classes will be in the bag, signed, sealed, and delivered on that December date, if that is established.
Yeah.
And that just a few positions will be left open for a lot of the schools, and then the ones that still are struggling. Let's say a team that's kind of taken that second level of recruit, right? Because they're not one of the premier programs. They're going to have a much clearer understanding of how many scholarships those other schools still have left and which kids they can go after. And it helps enhance their position to recruit some of these kids too. Mm-hmm. Now, if there's still some premier kids out there, those kids are going to get such a concentration of recruiting attention, it's not even funny. I mean, just imagine that. Now all of a sudden, Urban Meyer can focus all of his attention on 5 players because he's only got 3 spots left. So he's going to go after 5 or 6 players that are the best choices he's still in on, and he's going to devote enormous effort and energy to those kids.
Right.
You follow me?
Yeah. Well, like you were saying earlier, for if some top players decide that they, like you said, they like the attention, they want to keep playing the game, then after that December date, in those 2 months, it's going to be even more intense and even more focused on those individuals.
Right. And I think most kids are tired of the process by then, and they won't want to do that. I think most kids are going to be like, okay, this is it. This is my time. I'm going to do this and be done with it. And then I can have Christmas with my family, and I already know where I'm going. It's all done, and I'm relaxed, right?
Yep.
I mean, that's way better.
Yeah.
So
it'll be interesting to see that if it goes through the dynamics that play out as a result of that change. But I think overall, it's definitely a positive shift.
Yep. Well, but again, I think the only way that this is a good thing is if it also includes moving that official visit time frame. Because, and I know we're running a little long here, but understand that if you have official visits, again, there's 2 dynamics to that. It's going to help a school from a small population state like Nebraska, but it's also going to force decisions upon schools that are in major athlete concentrated areas like Ohio State, like Alabama, like University of Florida, because now they're going to have to be making some decisions about, okay, who are my really, really, really top priorities? And those kids, they may very well want to utilize some of their official visits on those top kids right now. They've got to show their hand now, early, right, in that April timeframe of their junior year, because they do not want to necessarily let a school like Nebraska get their claws into a kid deep because they have this incredible, experience at the spring game out in Lincoln, in April, and everybody gives them all this love, and mom and dad fall in love with the school and everything like that. And now all of a sudden, this guy that was in their backyard that they were sure they were going to get, now they're in a fight to get him. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so they will then be forced to say, you know what, we're going to use our official visits so we can wine and dine them. We can do all the formal stuff. We can do the whole pitch to these guys as a formal official visit.
Right. Well, and like you were saying earlier about the bigger schools maybe not being as hot on this whole earlier official visits thing, because like you say, it plays more to the advantage of the smaller population schools like Nebraska. But if the December, if people agree on the December signing day thing, what do you think the chances are that the bigger schools and the presidents of those bigger schools could mount a successful argument against it?
I think it's pretty good. In fact, if you were asking me to predict, I'm going to predict for you right now, you're going to get the December signing date. You're not going to get the movement of the official visit. That's what I think is going to happen. I think those schools who want it to stay the way it is because it's strongly to their advantage to do so are going to vote in that way.
I guess
because there just isn't. I mean, it's not. They don't care that it's not fair. They don't care that they have access to these athletes because they're within a 100-mile radius of their town, and for us, we have to go 800 or 1,000 miles to get those same kids to travel to us. They don't care that's a problem for us.
Right.
Well,
yeah. Obviously, yeah. Like you say, it's to their advantage with the current system. I just hope that with the December signing day, that would make a logical reason for why earlier officials, maybe not April, but to make it earlier than August or September, whatever it is now.
Right.
Would seem like I would hope that thought would prevail in that meeting.
Me too. And I think if it's ultimately a decision that's made by administrators and presidents, then we have a decent chance. If they're going to be strongly influenced by athletic directors and coaches, we don't have a prayer of that going through. So, that's where I'm hoping the wiser heads prevail in this case to recognize that there needs to be an effort to have fairness and balance in the competitive balance of the sport.
All
so
right.
We'll see.
All right. Now, you had mentioned you had one other thing. Do you want to go into that or save it for next time?
No, we can save it for next time. Yep. So, it's good. So, this has been an interesting podcast. We've covered a lot of ground. I hope people found it interesting. And we sure would love it if folks would like us on iTunes or on Podomatic. And I'll let you go through all the different ways that we can do that. One of the kind of teaser things we can do is we have secured the website collegefootballthrowdown.com, and so we're hoping to move in the direction of establishing a website here very soon.
Oh, there we go. Well, yes, we, the next podcast we do, like we said, we're planning on doing one later in April after the spring games, so we'll talk about that, plus any news from other spring games from the major schools across the country, and we'll probably go more into this general talk about the NCAA rules and stuff, because clearly we have a lot to say on that issue. So if you enjoyed this podcast, you can find us, as he said, on iTunes. You can subscribe to us there, leave us a rating or review. We always like to hear from our fans. And you can also find us at College Football Throwdown, or footballthrowdown.podomatic.com is our main website.
Okay, say that one more time.
It's footballthrowdown.podomatic.com.
Okay.
Yes. I screwed up by adding the college on there, but we made it shorter than that.
Yes. I got it.
All right. Well, glad you got it. That was my main concern.
Yeah.
All right, good. Well, thank you for listening out there, and we will be back for episode 42 of College Football Throwdown. So until then, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.